There is a moment in every man's life when the world strips him naked, when everything he thought he knew crumbles beneath his feet like ash in the wind, when the comfortable lies he told himself about his strength, his purpose, his worth, are burned away by the merciless fire of reality. This moment is not a curse. It is not a punishment from the gods. It is an invitation. It's an invitation to discover what you are truly made of when all the pretense falls away. Most men run from this moment. They numb themselves with distractions, drown their pain in pleasure, or collapse into self-pity like children who have lost their favorite toy. But there have always been a few who understood something different. Something that the ancient world knew, but the modern world has forgotten. These men understood that pain is not the enemy of strength. It is the forge where true strength is born. 23 centuries ago, a slave named Epictetus sat in chains, his leg permanently damaged by his master's cruelty. He had every reason to curse the gods, to rage against his fate, to surrender to despair. Instead, he discovered something that would echo through the ages, that external circumstances have no power over the unconquerable fortress of the human spirit. In those chains, he found a freedom that no emperor could claim. In that suffering, he forged a philosophy that would outlast empires. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the world, wrote his deepest thoughts while commanding legions on the frozen frontiers of Germania, surrounded by death and decay. Facing the constant threat of assassination and the crushing weight of empire, he discovered that true power comes not from commanding others, but from commanding oneself. His meditations, written in the shadow of war and mortality, became the handbook for anyone who would walk the path of inner mastery. Seneca, who knew both the heights of wealth and the depths of exile, who faced death sentences and political intrigue, understood that a man is not measured by what happens to him, but by how he responds to what happens to him. He learned that fortune is a fickle mistress, but character is eternal. He discovered that the man who can lose everything and still maintain his dignity has found something more valuable than gold. These were not men who lived easy lives. They were not protected from the harsh realities of existence by privilege or luck. They were men who walked through fire and emerged not unburned, but transformed. They understood a truth that cuts through all the comfortable delusions of our age, that avoiding pain is not strength, it is weakness. It's that seeking comfort is not wisdom, it is foolishness. It's that the path to becoming truly powerful runs directly through the territory most men spend their lives trying to avoid. Pain, you see, is not optional. It comes for every man in every age and every circumstance. The question is not whether you will suffer, the question is what you will do with the suffering when it arrives at your door, like an unwelcome guest who refuses to leave. You can spend your energy fighting against it, cursing it, pretending it doesn't exist. Or you can do what the Stoics did. You can invite it in, study it, learn from it, and use it to forge yourself into something harder than the circumstances that created it. When Marcus Aurelius wrote that the universe is change, our life is what our thoughts make it. He was not speaking from a place of theoretical philosophy. He was speaking from the battlefield of experience. He'd watched plagues ravage his empire, seen his children die, felt the weight of impossible decisions that would affect millions of lives. He knew that life is not a gentle teacher who speaks in whispers. It is a harsh instructor who teaches through suffering, its loss, and the constant reminder of our mortality. But in this harsh instruction, he found something beautiful. He found that a man who accepts what he cannot change becomes unbreakable. Not because he is immune to pain, but because he has learned to transform pain into power. Not because he doesn't feel the sting of loss, but because he has discovered that loss can be a teacher more valuable than any gain. The Stoics practiced something they called negative visualization, deliberately imagining the loss of everything they held dear. This was not masochism or pessimism. This was training. They understood that the man who is mentally prepared for the worst that life can deliver will never be caught off guard by circumstance. They knew that the warrior who has already died 1,000 deaths in his mind will face actual death with the calm of someone greeting an old friend. They practiced voluntary discomforts, leaping on hard floors, eating simple food, walking in harsh weather without complaint. Again, this was not self-torture. This was strength training for the soul. They understood that the man who can be comfortable in discomfort will never be at the mercy of his circumstances. They knew that luxury makes men soft. Soft men break when life applies pressure. Epictetus, despite his chains, was freer than his master. Why? Because he understood the difference between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Could control his body, but could not touch his thoughts, his choices, his inner response to whatever was done to him. In this understanding, he found a power that no external force could take away. He discovered that the last freedom, the freedom to choose your response, can never be stolen, it's only surrendered. When you are betrayed by someone you trusted, when your plans crumble, when your body fails you, when death takes someone you love, when the world seems designed to crush your spirit, these are not interruptions to your path. They are the path. They are the moments when you discover what you are actually made of beneath all the stories you tell yourself about who you are. The Stoics knew that there are two types of men in this world: those who are shaped by their circumstances, and those who shape their circumstances through their response to them. The first type lives at the mercy of external events, rising and falling like a ship in a storm. The second type has found something deeper than circumstance, something that remains steady regardless of what winds may blow. This is not about becoming emotionally numb or pretending that pain doesn't hurt. The Stoics were not robots. They felt everything as deeply as any man. Marcus Aurelius grieved for his children. Seneca felt the sting of exile. Epictetus knew the humiliation of slavery. But they understood that feeling pain and being controlled by pain are two entirely different things. They learned to observe their emotions like weather patterns, acknowledging them, understanding them, but not being ruled by them. When your heart is broken, when rejection cuts you to the bone, when failure makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself, these are not signs that something is wrong with your life. These are signs that you are alive, that you are engaged with reality instead of hiding from it. The question is not how to avoid these experiences, but how to use them to become the man you were meant to be. The ancient Stoics spoke of the discipline of desire, learning to want what happens rather than demanding that what happens conform to your wants. It sounds like surrender, but it is actually the ultimate victory. The man who can say yes to his circumstances, who can find meaning in his suffering, who can transform his pain into wisdom. This man has found a power that no external force can touch. Amor fatila, your fate. Not because your fate is always pleasant, but because your fate is the raw material from which you will build your character. Every setback is a setup for a comeback, but only if you have the courage to see it that way. Every wound is a place where strength can grow, but only if you resist the temptation to stay wounded. The wolf does not complain about the harshness of winter, it grows thicker fur. The mountain does not curse the storms that batter it, it stands firm and lets the wind carve it into something magnificent. The iron does not resent the fire, it emerges from the forge stronger than before. You are not different from these things. You are not exempt from the laws that govern all strong things in this universe, Seneca wrote. Every new beginning comes from some other beginning's end. He understood that before you can become who you are meant to be, you must allow who you is. Used to be to die. This death is not comfortable. It involves letting go of old identities, old certainties, old ways of seeing yourself in the world. It means walking into the unknown with nothing but your character as a compass. But this death is also a birth. The caterpillar must dissolve completely before it can become a butterfly. The seed must break open before it can become a tree. You must be willing to let your current self be destroyed by circumstances if you want to discover what lies beneath the surface of your current identity. The Stoics understood that there are two ways to be rich: have much or want little. They chose the second path because they understood that the man who needs nothing is more powerful than the man who has everything. The man who can be content with simple food is freer than the man who requires exotic pleasures. The man who can sleep on stone is stronger than the man who needs silk sheets. This is not about poverty or self-denial for its own sake. This is about freedom. The more things you need to be happy, the more vulnerable you are to the loss of those things. The fewer things you need, the more unshakable your peace becomes. The Stoics trained themselves to find contentment in the simplest circumstances because they understood that circumstances change. But the man who has learned to be happy with little will be happy in any circumstance. When life puts you in a position where you have no choice but to endure, where there is no escape route, no easy way out. No one coming to rescue you. This is not abandonment. This is opportunity. This is your chance to discover reserves of strength you never knew you possessed. This is your invitation to join the ranks of those who have found something unbreakable within themselves. The modern world tells you that you should never have to suffer, that pain is always a problem to be solved, that discomfort is always a sign that something is wrong. But the Stoics knew better. They understood that some of the most valuable things in life can only be learned through difficulty. They knew that the man who has never been tested by hardship has never been given the opportunity to discover his true strength. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is action in the presence of fear. Strength is not the absence of pain. Is grace under pressure? Wisdom is not the absence of mistakes. Is learning from every failure. Character is not the absence of challenges. It is how you respond when challenges come. The Stoics practiced what they called the discipline of action, doing what needs to be done regardless of how you feel about it. They understood that feelings are temporary, but actions have permanent consequences. They knew that the man who waits until he feels motivated will wait forever. But the man who acts regardless of his feelings will build momentum that carries him through any obstacle. When you don't want to get up anyway. When you don't want to do the work, do it anyway. When you don't want to face the difficult conversation, have it anyway. When you don't want to forgive anyway. When you don't want to let go anyway. This is how you build the kind of character that can weather any storm. Epictetus taught that we are like actors in a play. We don't choose our role, but we can choose how well we play it. You didn't choose to be born in this time, in this place, with these particular challenges, but you can choose to play your role with excellence, regardless of whether it's a leading role or a supporting one. Regardless of whether the script calls for triumph or tragedy, the Stoics understood that reputation is what others think of you. But character is what you are when no one is watching. They cared more about the second than the first because they understood that reputation is fragile and temporary, but character is eternal. The man who builds his life on the opinions of others is building on sand. But the man who builds his life on his own standards is building on rock. When you are alone, in the darkness, when no one sees your struggle, when there are no witnesses to your pain, these are the moments when character is truly built. These are the times when you discover what you're willing to do when there's no applause, no recognition, no external reward. These are the moments when you find out who you really are beneath all the masks you wear for the world. The ancient Stoics spoke of the inner citadel, the unconquerable fortress of the human spirit that no external force can touch. This citadel is not built through comfort and ease. It is built stone by stone through every moment when you choose principle over pleasure, duty over desire, long-term strength over short-term relief. Every time you do what you said you would do, even when you don't feel like it, you add a stone to this fortress. Every time you keep your word to yourself, you strengthen its walls. Every time you endure without complaining, you deepen its foundations. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you raise its towers higher. This citadel becomes your refuge, not from the storms of life, but in the midst of them. It becomes the place from which you can watch the chaos of external circumstances with the calm of someone who knows that nothing out there can touch what matters most in here. It becomes your source of strength when all other sources fail. The Stoics knew that the opinion of others is not up to you, but your response to their opinions is. They understood that you cannot control what happens to you, but you can control what happens in you. They learned that external events have no inherent meaning. They only have the meaning you give them through your interpretation. When someone betrays you, you can choose to see it as evidence that the world is cruel and people are not to be trusted. Or you can choose to see it as information about that particular person and an opportunity to practice forgiveness and discernment. When you fail at something important, you can choose to see it as proof that you're not good enough. Or you can choose to see it as feedback that will make your next attempt more likely to succeed. The Stoics practiced reframing every setback as a setup, every obstacle as an opportunity, every loss as a lesson. This is not naive optimism, it's strategic thinking. They understood that the story you tell yourself about your circumstances shapes your response to them, and your response shapes your future circumstances. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present." He understood that anxiety lives in the future and regret lives in the past, but power lives in the present moment. The man who can fully inhabit the current moment, who can give his complete attention to what is in front of him right now, has found a kind of peace that no external circumstance can disturb. This present moment awareness is not about ignoring the future or forgetting the past. It is about understanding that the present moment is the only place where you have any actual power. You cannot change the past through worry, and you cannot control the future through anxiety. But you can shape your future by making the best possible choices in the present moment. The Stoics taught that every moment is a choice between virtue and vice, between strength and weakness, between growth and stagnation. They understood that character is not built through grand gestures, but through small, daily decisions that seem insignificant in isolation, but compound over time into something magnificent. The choice to speak truth when lying would be easier, the choice to keep working when quitting would be more comfortable, the choice to maintain your standards when lowering them would be more convenient, the choice to stay disciplined when indulgence beckons. These tiny choices made consistently over time determine whether you become the kind of man who can be trusted with great challenges or the kind who breaks under small pressures. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, who is poor." He understood that poverty and wealth are states of mind more than states of bank accounts. The man who is grateful for what he has is rich, regardless of his circumstances. The man who always wants more is poor, no matter how much he accumulates. This gratitude is not about settling for less than you deserve or abandoning your ambitions. It is about finding contentment in the present while working toward the future. It is about appreciating what you have while you work for what you want. It is about understanding that happiness that depends on getting something you don't have is not happiness at all, it is postponed misery. The Stoics practiced negative visualization not to become pessimistic, but to become genuinely grateful. They would imagine losing their health, their relationships, their possessions, not because they wanted these things to happen, but because they wanted to appreciate them while they had them. They understood that the man who takes his blessings for granted will lose the joy of having them long before he loses the blessings themselves. When you practice imagining loss, you discover something profound, that most of what you think you need for happiness, you don't actually need. That most of what you fear losing wouldn't actually destroy you if you lost it. That most of what you're anxious about wouldn't actually matter as much as you think it would. Hey, this practice doesn't make you negative, it makes you free. The Stoics understood that freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want. It is the ability to want whatever you do. The man who can find meaning and purpose in any circumstance is truly free, while the man who can only be happy under specific conditions is a prisoner of those conditions. This freedom comes through what the Stoics called the discipline of assent, the practice of examining your thoughts and beliefs before accepting them as truth. Most men are controlled by thoughts they never chose to think, beliefs they never consciously adopted, fears they never rationally evaluated. The Stoic learns to step back from his automatic reactions and ask, is this thought serving me? This belief true? Is this fear rational? When you feel anger rising, you can pause and ask, what would responding with anger accomplish that responding with calm would not? When you feel the urge to quit, you can pause and ask, is this urge based on genuine wisdom or momentary discomfort? When you feel overwhelmed by circumstances, you can pause and ask, what part of this situation is actually under my control? This practice of conscious choice in your mental responses is perhaps the most powerful tool the Stoics developed. It transforms you from someone who is tossed around by every wind of circumstance and emotion into someone who maintains steady direction regardless of external conditions. The ancient Stoics knew that every external thing you depend on for your sense of identity, security, or happiness is ultimately outside your control and therefore unreliable. Your job can be taken away, your relationships can end, your health can fail, your reputation can be destroyed, your possessions can be lost. But your character, the sum total of your choices, your responses, your principles, that belongs to you completely. This is why they focus so intensely on character development. Not because external things don't matter, but because character is the only thing that can never be taken from you against your will. It is the only investment that is guaranteed to pay dividends regardless of market conditions. It is the only treasure that thieves cannot steal and time cannot erode. When Epictetus was asked what he would want if he could have anything in the world, he replied that he would want wisdom, ability to make good choices regardless of circumstances. He understood that the man who knows how to respond well to any situation is wealthier than the man who owns everything but doesn't know what to do with it. This wisdom is not academic knowledge, it is practical skill in the art of living. It is knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to hold on and when to let go, when to be flexible and when to be firm, when to fight and when to surrender, when to lead and when to follow. This wisdom cannot be learned from books alone, must be forged in the fire of real experience. The Stoics embraced difficult experiences because they understood that smooth seas never made skilled sailors. They sought out challenges because they knew that unused strength atrophies. They welcomed obstacles because they recognized them as opportunities too. Practice their philosophy under pressure. This does not mean they were masochists who sought pain for its own sake. It means they were realists who understood that pain is inevitable. So they chose to use it constructively rather than allowing it to use them destructively. They were like martial artists who practice being hit so that when they are actually struck in battle, they know how to absorb the blow and counter effectively. The modern world encourages you to avoid discomfort at all costs. It promises you that the right product, the right relationship, the right circumstance will finally make you happy. But the Stoics knew this is a lie. They understood that the pursuit of comfort leads not to happiness, but to weakness, and weakness leads to suffering. Far greater than any temporary discomfort, the man who cannot tolerate cold will suffer when winter comes. The man who cannot tolerate hunger will suffer when food is scarce. The man who cannot tolerate loneliness will suffer when relationships end. The man who cannot tolerate failure will suffer when plans don't work out. But the man who has learned to be comfortable with discomfort is prepared for anything life might bring. Seneca practiced voluntary poverty, regularly living for periods on simple bread and water, sleeping on the floor, wearing rough clothing. He did this while he was wealthy, not because he wanted to be poor, but because he wanted to know that he could handle poverty if it came. He wanted to remove the fear of loss that makes most men slaves to their possessions. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, regularly reminded himself that his power was temporary and that he was fundamentally just a man like any other. He practiced seeing himself from the perspective of eternity, where the difference between emperor and slave disappears into insignificance. This practice kept him humble and focused on what truly mattered. Epictetus, despite his physical limitations, trained his mind to be stronger than any body could be. He understood that the body is temporary and fragile, but the mind, properly trained, can be unbreakable. He learned to find power in the very limitations that others would see as weaknesses. These men understood something that the modern world has forgotten: that strength comes not from having everything you want, but from not needing anything you don't have. That peace comes not from controlling your circumstances, but from accepting what you cannot control while fully controlling what you can. That happiness comes not from the absence of problems, but from the presence of purpose. The Stoics knew that life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. They understood that trying to make life comfortable and predictable is like trying to make water dry, goes against the fundamental nature of what you're working with. Life is unpredictable, challenging, often painful, but it is also the arena in which you can discover and develop your greatest strengths. When you stop fighting against the nature of existence and start working with it, you discover something remarkable, that you are much stronger than you thought you were, that you can handle much more than you believed you could, that what you thought would destroy you might actually be exactly what you needed to become who you were meant to be. The Stoics practiced what they called the view from above, regularly imagining themselves from the perspective of cosmic space. In time, from this view, most of what seems urgent and important in daily life shrinks to its proper proportions. The argument that felt so significant becomes trivial. The loss that felt devastating becomes manageable. The achievement that felt so important becomes one small event in an infinite universe. This practice is not meant to make you nihilistic or apathetic. It is meant to give you perspective so that you can respond to situations appropriately rather than being overwhelmed by them. It helps you save your energy for what truly matters instead of wasting it on what only seems to matter. The Stoics understood that most human suffering comes not from actual circumstances but from our thoughts about those circumstances. The man who loses his job suffers not just from unemployment but from his thoughts about what unemployment means. The man who is rejected suffers not just from the rejection but from his thoughts about what the rejection says about him. But if thoughts create suffering, then changing thoughts can end suffering. This is not about positive thinking or denial of reality. This is about accurate thinking, seeing situations as they actually are, rather than through the distorting lens of fear, ego, or desire. When you are fired, the fact is that your employment has ended. Everything else, what this means about your worth, your future, your identity's interpretation, not fact. When you are rejected, the fact is that one person has decided they don't want a relationship with you. Everything else, what this means about your attractiveness, your value, your lovability story, not reality. The Stoics learned to separate facts from interpretations, events from meanings, what happened from what they made it mean. This separation is the source of tremendous freedom because it reveals that you have much more choice in how you experience life than you might have realized. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This is not a platitude. It is a practical instruction for how to live. When you truly understand that your experience of life is determined more by your mental responses than by external events, you discover that you have been holding the key to your own freedom all along. This understanding changes everything. Stop being a victim of circumstances and become the author of your responses. You stop waiting for the world to change and start changing how you engage with the world. You stop demanding that life be different and start making yourself capable of handling life as it is. The Stoics knew that the man who can say, "I am responsible for my responses, regardless of what happens to me," has found a power that no external circumstance can touch. This is not about blaming yourself for things outside your control. It is about claiming ownership of the one thing that is always completely, entirely within your control: how you choose to respond. When betrayal comes, you choose whether to become bitter or wise. When loss comes, you choose whether to become broken or compassionate. When failure comes, you choose whether to become defeated or determined. When pain comes, you choose whether to become smaller or stronger. The circumstances don't make this choice for you. You make it for yourself. This choice is always available. In every moment, regardless of what has happened before or what might happen next. It is the one freedom that can never be taken away, only surrendered. It is the source of a strength that grows stronger with use rather than weaker. It is the foundation of a peace that no storm can shake. The Stoics practiced preparing for death not because they were morbid, but because they understood that remembering mortality clarifies priorities. The man who remembers that his time is limited wastes less of it on things that don't matter. The man who knows that everything he has is temporary appreciates it more while he has it. Memento mori remember, you will die. This is not a message of despair, but of urgency and clarity. It is a reminder to live fully while you can, to love deeply while you're able, to create meaning while you have the opportunity. It is an invitation to stop postponing your real life until some imaginary future when conditions will be perfect. The Stoics understood that death gives life its meaning, just as darkness gives light its value. If you were guaranteed to live forever, nothing would be precious, because you would have infinite time to experience everything. Because your time is limited, each moment becomes valuable. Because your relationships will end, each interaction becomes significant. Because your opportunities are finite, each choice becomes important. This awareness of mortality does not make life tragic, it makes life urgent and beautiful and meaningful. It transforms you from someone who drifts through days without paying attention into someone who is fully present for the limited time you have. It changes you from someone who takes things for granted into someone who recognizes the preciousness of ordinary moments. The Stoics taught that the best preparation for tomorrow is to live today with excellence. They understood that you cannot control the future, but you can control the quality of preparation you bring to whatever the future might hold. They knew that the man who has lived each day with integrity and purpose will be ready for whatever comes next. This is not about perfectionism or anxiety about the future. This is about presence and excellence in the current moment. It is about bringing your best self to whatever situation you find yourself in, not because the situation deserves it, but because excellence is its own reward. When you live this way, you discover something profound, that you don't need external validation to know that your life has meaning. You don't need applause to know that you've done well. You don't need recognition to know that you've made a difference. The quality of your character, the integrity of your choices, the excellence of your responses, these create their own meaning, that no external circumstance can diminish. The ancient Stoics understood that there are two types of pain in this world: the pain of discipline and the pain of regret. The pain of discipline weighs ounces, but the pain of regret weighs tons. They chose the lighter pain because they understood that avoiding discipline doesn't eliminate pain, it just postpones it and makes it heavier. The pain of getting up early weighs ounces, but the pain of wasted opportunities weighs tons. The pain of difficult conversations weighs ounces, but the pain of unresolved relationships weighs tons. The pain of honest self-examination weighs ounces, but the pain of living an unexamined life weighs tons. The Stoics embraced the small pains that prevent large pains. They chose temporary discomfort over permanent regret. They understood that the man who is willing to be uncomfortable for a short time can be comfortable for a long time, while the man who insists on being comfortable in the short term often creates discomfort that lasts for years. This is the difference between the strong and the weak. The strong choose their pain, while the weak have pain chosen for them. The strong face their dragons while they are small. The weak allow their dragons to grow until they become insurmountable. The strong do what is hard when it is easy, while the weak wait until what is easy becomes hard. Seneca wrote, "It is likely that some troubles will befall us, but it is not a present fact." How often has the unexpected happened? How often has the expected never come to pass? He understood that most of our suffering comes not from actual problems, but from imaginary ones. We suffer more in imagination than in reality because our minds are capable of creating unlimited scenarios of disaster that never actually occur. The Stoics practice distinguishing between what is happening and what might happen, between present reality and future possibility, between actual problems and imaginary ones. This distinction is crucial because energy spent worrying about things that might never happen is energy not available for dealing with things that are actually happening. When you catch your mind creating stories about potential disasters, you can ask, is this happening now, or am I creating suffering about something that might never occur? When you find yourself anxious about the future, you can ask, what can I actually do about this situation right now? When you discover yourself ruminating about past mistakes, you can ask, how is this helping me make better choices moving forward? The Stoics knew that the present moment is the only place where you have any actual power, and they train themselves to keep their attention focused there, not because they ignored the future or forgot the past, but because they understood that presence is power and distraction is weakness. This presence of mind is like a muscle that grows stronger with exercise. Every time you notice your mind wandering into anxiety about the future or regret about the past and bring it back to the present moment, you are strengthening your capacity for focus and peace. Every time you choose to deal with what is rather than what might be, you are building the kind of mental discipline that can handle any challenge. The Stoics understood that emotions are not facts, they are reactions. They're information about how you are interpreting a situation, not reliable. Information about the situation itself. Anger tells you that you believe something unfair has happened. Fear tells you that you believe something dangerous might happen. Sadness tells you that you believe something valuable has been lost. But beliefs can be wrong. Interpretations can be inaccurate. Initial reactions can be based on incomplete information or distorted perceptions. This is why the Stoics practiced examining their emotions rather than immediately acting on them. They learned to treat their feelings as data to be analyzed rather than commands to be obeyed. This does not mean suppressing or ignoring emotions. It means developing the capacity to feel them without being controlled by them. It means learning to observe your emotional reactions with the same kind of objective curiosity you might bring to observing the weather. It means understanding that you are not your emotions. You are the consciousness that experiences emotions. When you develop this capacity for emotional observation, you discover something liberating, that you can feel angry without acting angrily, feel afraid without behaving fearfully, feel sad without becoming depressed. You learn that emotions, like weather, are temporary phenomena that come and go, and that your fundamental self remains steady regardless of what emotional weather might be passing through. The Stoics practiced what they called the discipline of perception, learning to see things as they actually are, rather than as they first appear. They understood that most problems are not as bad as they initially seem, and most catastrophes are not as catastrophic as they first appear. When something goes wrong, the immediate reaction is often to catastrophize, to imagine the worst possible consequences, and act as if they are inevitable. But the Stoics learned to pause and ask, what exactly has happened here? What are the actual facts, separated from my fears about what those facts might mean? What opportunities might be hidden in this apparent setback? This practice of accurate perception is like cleaning the lens of a camera. When the lens is dirty, everything looks blurry and distorted. When the lens is clean, you can see clearly what is actually there. Most people live with dirty lenses, see their fears and desires and expectations rather than reality itself. The Stoics spent considerable energy learning to clean these lenses. They practiced seeing their own thoughts and reactions objectively. They learned to recognize their biases and prejudices. They developed the ability to separate what they wanted to be true from what was actually true. This clarity of perception is the foundation of all wisdom. You cannot make good decisions based on bad information. You cannot respond appropriately to situations you do not accurately understand. You cannot solve problems you have not correctly identified. The quality of your perceptions determines the quality of your responses, and the quality of your responses determines the quality of your life. Marcus Aurelius regularly practiced seeing himself and his circumstances from multiple perspectives. He would imagine how his current problems would look from the viewpoint of a peasant, how his imperial power would appear to someone living centuries later, how his daily concerns would seem from the perspective of the cosmos itself. This practice of perspective shifting prevented him from taking himself too seriously while still taking his responsibilities seriously. It helped him maintain humility in success and dignity in failure. It allowed him to see patterns and possibilities that are invisible. When you were trapped in a single point of view, the Stoics understood that most limitations exist in the mind before they exist in reality. The man who believes he cannot endure hardship will crumble at the first sign of difficulty. The man who believes he cannot learn new skills will never develop them. The man who believes he cannot change will remain stuck in patterns that no longer serve him. But the man who understands that his capabilities are largely determined by his beliefs about his capabilities can expand those capabilities by expanding those beliefs. This is not about positive thinking or self-deception. It is about accurate assessment of human potential and the willingness to test your limits rather than assuming you have already reached them. Epictetus, despite being born a slave with a disabled leg, became one of the most influential philosophers in human history. He could have used his circumstances as excuses for why he could not achieve greatness. Instead, he used them as raw material for developing the kind of inner strength that makes external circumstances irrelevant. His example demonstrates something crucial, that your starting point does not determine your ending point.